Hey guys, it's Evan from Evan K Exotics, and today we are going to be talking about the importance of air quality in your reptile collection, both in your room and in your cages. We're going to be talking about some cage design concepts that I've noticed aren't quite right in a lot of cages that are being produced right now, and I'm also going to be talking about the importance of your room quality as the number of animals grows and the density, stocking density of your room increases. So I think that overall what you want to be thinking about is you want to be thinking of fresh air as important as fresh water. So if you would never think about letting a slightly scummy bowl of water sit in your boa's cage, you should never allow dank fetid air conditions to happen in your cage. And there's two primary reasons why this that you want to control this. And the first reason is that dank, underventilated conditions equates with wet conditions, equates with drippy conditions, equates with a high bacteria load in your cage. And this is a problem for a lot of, this is a real drag on general health. I'll tell you one of the things that you might see if you have an undervented cage, which is overly wet. That's kind of, they kind of work in interlock, ventilation and humidity, is you're going to start to get an overbloom of bacteria, and that can manifest itself in ways such as just molding all over your cages. A little bit of mold is not a sign of problems, but if you just have constantly molding cages, or the glass is molding or the walls are molding, you have an underventilated, overwet cage. It can cause skin conditions to pop up. Basically, I think what happens is when you have underventilation, two things are happening. The animal urinates, passes urates, which are ammonia. They're highly ammonic. And if you had a well-ventilated cage, and the substrate was proper, you would have that absorbed by the substrate and quickly dried out. But when you have an underventilated cage, you have that urine sit in a liquid form longer, and also you have the issue of that drippiness and moisture from the cage constantly keeping that urate wet, and so it will never dry out, and that creates a very high ammonia content in the air. You should not be experiencing that strong ammonia smell in your room or in your cages consistently. I will tell you that that if you have any of that ammonia smell, that's a real harbinger to respiratory issues. It's really unhealthy for these animals to sit and breathe ammonic air. It's unhealthy for you. I've been in reptile collections, I've been in reptile stores, I've been in reptile facilities where I didn't feel the air quality was healthy for me. And I'm like, how in the heck is that healthy for the animals to sit in this 24/7, 365? So you really need to be staying on top of your air quality. And the two ways to do that are by by only adding the proper amounts of moisture and humidity, removing ammonia, removing waste moisture, removing feces, and then properly ventilating the cage. And so this is all kind of in an interlock, and it's the same philosophy if you're raising rodents indoors. If you have a really high density of rodents, basically every drop of water that you put into that collection through a water bowl in your snake room or in the water in a rodent collection gets passed back into the room in the form of respiration, exhaling, and also urination and defecation. And so that means that if you're putting, it takes about 12 gallons of water to fill all my water bowls every week, and if you're putting that into your cages, you have to take it out in the form of removing dirty substrate, removing feces, wiping up urine, things like that, and also take it out by ventilating through the air. You can remove that excess humidity and through ventilation. So it's some combination of those two things that you need to do to maintain good air quality. If your boa room does not smell like a nice, warm greenhouse, you have air quality issues. That's kind of something I will tell people about air quality issues, is that your room and your cages especially when you stick them in, they should smell like a nice, clean greenhouse. I don't know if you know that smell, but it smells like soil. It doesn't smell like nothing, but it smells like soil. It smells natural. It smells like it's a thriving, balanced ecosystem of humidity and ventilation and temperature and clean up bacteria. So if your room doesn't smell like that, or it doesn't smell like nothing, you probably have air quality issues. If you get whiffs of ammonia, if you can smell your animals before you open the door, you have hygiene and air ventilation, air quality issues that will manifest in health problems with your animals. I think that people talk about things you need to really do to manage the health of your animals. That's one of the paramount things you need to do, is just manage that hygiene and that air quality. So going on to your cages, let me talk about some things that I think are a little improper in the current trends in cages, and that is that I think that the classic PVC cages that we see are under ventilated. I think that they're just simply too tight. I think that there is this movement, especially in a certain sect of the hobby, and I'll tell you that when I got back into keeping, I went down this road, and that's why I can tell you I don't like it. Is if you get like a 4 foot by 2 foot by 18-inch PVC cage, and it's only got those little 2 vents in the corners, it's a very tight box. It's almost hermetic, okay? And that's why so that means that you just have a lack of airflow, a lack of air exchange, especially if you don't run a ceiling fan or a fan in your room. You're just going to have no air currents to exchange air. That is just going to be static, still air in there, and that's going to lead to overly wet, overly dank conditions. I will also tell you that the amount of ventilation is not the only thing you have to be worried about. It's the placement of the ventilation. So like with an open top screened hood cage, you have a lot of ventilation, but 2 problems. One, you're creating convective drying because the heat is running out of it, which makes it a challenge to maintain the other parameters in your cage. And 2, because there is not like a flow through. It's not like there's a vent on both sides. There's a lot of air pressure that air has to overcome to actually ventilate the cage. Whereas if you had vents low on one side and vents high on the other side, you would have a much more dynamic air ventilating situation. So that's just kind of what I will tell you, is that with most modern PVC cages that I've seen, they're just too tight. They're simply too under ventilated. I actually have a video about this with animal plastics cages, and one of the great things about animal plastics, we always talk about how long the lead times is, but 2 great things. 1, I think they represent an excellent value in the hobby, and 2, they're very willing to work with you in customization. So if you're going to order, for example, animal plastics cages, I would simply order it double ventilated. It doesn't cost anything more. I just say double ventilation. They put twice as many ventilation holes into it as other people would. But if you're buying from somebody else, you need to consider how much ventilation. Most PVC cages I have seen are very under ventilated. Examples of cages that I think have good proper amounts of ventilation, an old one are the Neodisha cages. They just have better ventilation. They have bigger open vents. They're on the sides. There's a couple on top depending on the model you have, but they have much better ventilation dynamics. Vision cages have pretty good ventilation, although they start to function a little bit more like a open top tank, just the way the ventilation is. But vision cages are well ventilated. They have enough ventilation. The other ones that people don't talk about a lot that I think actually have really excellent ventilation, I actually think they're one of the better designed cages on the market, are they're called PM Herp cages, like Paul, Mary, Herp, like herpetological cages. I think that's what you can find them online. PM Herp cages. Also, I think they're called Doug Bar cages. Those have a really perfect amount of ventilation. They're just, and if you look at them, they just do. They're really excellent. And all those cages that I'm listing are kind of old school cages. And I think the reason why they have the proper amount of cages, ventilation in my mind, is because the idea of a very tight cage is a more modern idea. It's an idea that's come about more with newer keepers, and it's probably not even necessarily like a bad idea. It's probably an artifact of the fact that more modern keepers have access to like better thermostats, better heating elements, tighter abilities to control environments, and because of that, it means that they can run a little more tight, under-ventilated cage without getting away from each other with themselves with heat and whatnot. Whereas I think back in the day, you had a much less precise control of your heaters and whatnot. So one of the buffers against overheating was ventilation. So I think that's just something you'll see. It's kind of like, it's a chicken and egg argument, but like what came first? Tighter controls of our heating elements or under-ventilated cages? But overall, I think that the trend and the modern trend is to go under-ventilated and a little too tightly controlled of heating situations. Whereas I tend to run more ventilation and I allow it to get a little more dynamic with its temperature variations due to that ventilation. That's just an overarching concept I would tell you. The final concept I will, I guess before we move on, I guess the only other thing I will tell you is you need to be removing your moisture and your urine from your cages, and you need to be aerating your sources of humidity for proper air hygiene. So that means you need to be pulling out your urate covered paper, your urate covered substrates. You need to be pulling out any spilled water that's from in your cages, and you need to be removing anything that is going to be just sitting in your cages long term, and be a combination between that and your ventilation. You should have good air quality in your cages. One thing where it starts to become an issue when your collection grows is that you can have room air quality issues due to the stocking density of your room. So just like putting a large snake in a small cage would be like overstocking the cage, and that would lead to dank, fetid air conditions. If you put 300 ball pythons in a bedroom without some sort of air exchange, you have an overstocked room. The amount of biomass in that room is too high for the air volume. Similarly, if you have a big boa in a cage that is 12 inches tall, not only does it not have the climbing opportunities, but it doesn't have that extra air volume. So air volume is as important as footprint in terms of air quality, I will tell you that. And so some ideas behind that is you need to have some sort of air exchange in your reptile room year round. In the summertime, when it's temperate outside, I keep a window open a lot. In the winter, I will at least open the reptile room into the part of my house to do some air exchange. I will tell you that if you're like, but that's going to put the smell into my room or into my house, clean your damn room, clean your damn reptiles. But so I'll open the door and just let some air exchange come in. I have a bathroom that's adjacent to my reptile room, and I'll run the exhaust fan, and what it's doing is it's gently pulling conditioned air from the house through the reptile rooms out the back and exhausting it. So that's kind of how I get fresh air in the winter. But you need to be considering your stocking density and air exchange in your room just like you would your cages. The next step for me in terms of air quality in my room is I would like to install an outside heat recovery air exchanger, which is this device that looks kind of like a bathroom vent fan you put in your room, and it has a series of heat sinks, and it will exchange your room's warm air for outside cold air. But as it does that, it will run the warm air over a heat sink and precondition the cold air so that you are recapturing some of your heat, so you're not just blowing all your heat and money out the window. So that's kind of the next step for me, is I'd like to add a heat recovery outside air exchanger into my room, because that's how important I think it is. I'm willing to put about a $500 or $600 device in each one of my rooms and get it professionally wired, because I think it's that important. So those are just some concepts about air quality that I tell you that you should be thinking about, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. But Dennis from Aces Boas was talking about substrate and urates and urine and how that affects health, and so I thought I'd make this video because he's actually inspiring me to think a lot about my animals too. So take care, have a great day, bye-bye.